Hello, world, and welcome back to another episode of Practicing Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. My name is Sarah, and I'm here with my friend Lizelle. And today we're going to be talking about episode 25, which is called The Clash. And so, as we usually do, I'm going to pass it over to Lizelle to get us started with a quote.
Hello, world. I told Sarah I'm being drawn back to after Socrates, or not the series, but Socrates himself. So the intention is to share some of Socrates like through this series as well, especially since we're now moving into, well, as of next time, the more cognitive science and away from the philosophy. So I'm bringing some philosophy in. So I'm reading from Meno, which is the one, it's mostly known for Meno's paradox, but I'm going to stop just before Meno actually states his paradox. So Meno says to Socrates, Socrates, even before I met you, they told me that in plain truth, you are a perplexed man yourself and reduce others to perplexity. At this moment, I feel you are exercising magic and witchcraft upon me and positively laying me under your spell until I am just a mass of helplessness. If I may be flippant, I think not only in outward appearance, but in other respects as well, you are exactly like the flat stingray that one meets in the sea. I think it's hilarious telling Socrates he looks like a stingray, a flat stingray.
I know.
Whenever anyone comes into contact with it, it numbs him. And that is the sort of thing that you seem to be doing to me now. My mind and my lips are literally numb, and I have nothing to reply to you, Aporia. Yet I have spoken about virtue hundreds of times, held forth often on the subject in front of large audiences, and very well too, or so I thought. Now I can't even say what it is. In my opinion, you are well advised not to leave Athens and live abroad. If you behave like this as a foreigner in another country, you would most likely be arrested as a wizard. Then Socrates speaks. You're a real rascal, Meno. You nearly took me in, Meno. Just what do you mean, Socrates? I see why you used a simile about me, Meno. Why do you think? Socrates. To be compared to something in return.
Oh,
All good all good-looking people, I know perfectly well, enjoy a game of comparisons. They get the best of it, for naturally handsome folk provoke handsome similes. But I'm not going to oblige you. As for myself, if the stingray paralyzes others only through being paralyzed itself, then the comparison is just, but not otherwise. It isn't that, knowing the answers myself, I perplex other people. The truth is rather that I infect them also with the perplexity that I feel myself. So a virtue now. I don't know what it is. You may have known before you came into contact with me, but now you look as if you don't. Nevertheless, I am ready to carry out, together with you, a joint investigation and inquiry into what it is.
aw, what a guy. I love him so much.
Yes, I thought it's really cool to start presenting Socrates a little bit.
Yeah, what was really coming out from that for me with regards to this episode is that even when presented as this idea of being a messianic figure, he's like, let's talk about it. So there's something in
Exactly.
that where, and I was thinking about this before we even met, and I hadn't expressed this to you yet, but there's something about being offered the role of leadership and being like, and that's a good leader.
Yeah. Yes. That's what also is stated in Plato's Republic. The only ones that should lead is actually the ones who don't want to.
Well, that sets the stage very nicely for this conversation. The
Yeah,
clash.
someone was a bit too eager to be a leader in our history.
Couple of them, I think. Even
Yeah.
thought leaders. I mean, we were picking on Hegel last time, or maybe the time before, where we're just like, wow, the hubris in this guy, because he's the one that discovered
Yeah.
self-realization, rationality. And we're like, oh, what a guy, he's just, and even, I mean, it holds true, because even anybody that's going to counter his thesis is just producing a higher thesis. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, but he kind of thought that, I think he thought that it can't really go beyond him. And that was where his hubris was, which is like, no. So
yeah.
that is why you will be counteracted, because your theory actually holds.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was cool. I like that quote to begin us with, because it takes a very special individual to be seen in this light and not accept it. No, no, no. We're all having this
Mm.
conversation, and I'm just infecting you with the same sort of question that I have. It's not an
Mm.
answer. It's another
Mm.
question.
Mm.
So, well, in the spirit of questioning everything, a recap of just a little bit of from last episode. So I'm gonna pass you the floor, because I want to see I know where you kind of want to go, but I just want to hear the words from you.
Yeah, it's a very long recap. So I'm just going to name a few things that jumped out at me. Um, Hegel, of course, was what the recap was about, and how he moved beyond Kant and the Romantics. The word Geist, I think, is important, because it is about the Geist, the spirit, spirituality that's being longed for, sought, chased after in wrong ways, and then that's what goes wrong. I feel like that's very present in this episode. And dialectic, John refers again to the fact that he uses the word dialectic, but in a different way from Plato. For Plato, it's a very anagogic process. Anagogic being self-transcendence, overcoming yourself, moving
Yeah.
up. And that is missing, which I think is also a clue for a possible, religion that is not a religion, like that the necessity of anagoge. The real is the rational, and the rational is the real. I have written down patterns of intelligibility, but I think that's
Yeah.
just because I really like the words patterns of intelligibility.
Well, it's relevant. That was actually the only thing that I wanted to add, was that he's saying from Hegel's perspective that reality is just the patterns of intelligibility. And then the Geist, the way that that's related with the Geist, is that the patterns of intelligibility in development. So them developing, the patterns of intelligibility are actually developing. So reality, in that sense, from Hegel's perspective, is that reality is always developing through this idea of the Geist. And then, okay, but which way does it develop towards? Anagoge or something else? And so that's what's really being highlighted in this episode in some parts, is like, what's that something else?
Because the thing is, everyone thought it would be utopia. So not you transcending yourself, but creating some sort of ideal state. And that did not happen. Uh, so
Yeah.
John always says neither nostalgia nor utopia. He says that's what he wants written on his gravestone.
Yeah.
Neither nostalgia nor utopia, and that comes really strong in this
Yeah.
episode.
Yeah. So that dialectical process complexifies the patterns of intelligibility, the Geist, the reality. There's a co-development of meaning, and being is absolute mind. So now we have a secularized God.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess, as opposed to anagoge, what do you have? The secularized God.
Mm-hmm.
So what is secularized God, shall we see? But there was that part about I don't know if you wanted to recap the oppositions to Hegel.
I also just want to add, it's basically, you said it, that he advocates for a new mythology. Yeah, so that's also interesting. Also part of recap. Okay, so I just have written down will, which is of course Schopenhauer and Nietzsche that said, hey, the will is missing there. So we want some of that. Then he mentioned Kierkegaard again, and that Kierkegaard said there's only propositions. You built this mansion, and now you're sitting next to it. There's no personal transformation. Again, that anagoge, which is missing, which is he is. And then there's the great and terrifying proposal by Marx, which says that no, history is not a didactic between ideas, it's a didactic between classes. We are driven by the monster. We are not driven by the man or the mind. So the appetites are not the mind. A great and terrifying proposal, he calls that idea of being driven by the monster. I love the words. And then the kairos becomes revolution, violent political change. And this is the words that I use it, and I made it in a little box. Powerful pseudo-religious ideologies becomes like the norm almost. Definitely of the previous century, but I'm not sure that it's missing in this one either.
The previous sanctuary?
The previous century.
Century. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was very much there, but I don't think it's missing from this one. I think it's very strong with us, just a little different.
Yeah.
Proposal of secularized political, socio-economic ideologies in conflict as the way in which spirit and spirituality is to be understood and pursued. So that gap, that famine for spirit, is being force-fed political ideologies.
That just like brought the image of like a feeding tube and just incapacitated sitting in a hospital bed. Yeah. Or worse, a prison cell being force fed. Translating religion to philosophy through mythology of reason is what I have about, and it's kind of going back just a little bit, but just kind of like furthering that what's happening with this idea of secularizing is now that the mythology is based around reason. And so that moves you into the political arena of reasoning between two political viewpoints because of that idea that self-realization of rationality. So rationality seeing itself. So then there's that political arena. So describing the political arena, in this instance, the instance that we're going to get to here with the clash is nationalism wedded to imperialism, this nation state and patriotism, and then your way of getting involved is participating in the elections and, really rallying around that, or revolution, whatever it looks like. And then there's this element of sacrifice, which I don't know what was that. Sacrificing for your country. Okay, yeah, like I'm gonna go to war and I will give my life. And there's something very relational with, our old relationship with God was what we were willing to die for God, but now it is based, I will die for my country.
I wrote in brackets, what are you devoted to? That's the question here. There's no God anymore to be devoted to, but we have this deep longing to be devoted, it seems. I don't know. We'll figure out. Maybe that's part of the machinery that wants to make meaning. And now people are devoted to their nation, or
Yeah. So that moves us into Germany.
Yes.
So I guess he says something along the lines of Germany is a very young country, like as an actual nation state. So like nationally, there was contributions that were made. And I'm imagining, because, it didn't really occur to me, but Germanic tribes That's often a word that's used to describe like where Proto-Indonesia, I think, is even proto. Anyway, however, linguistics goes back etymologically, they'll usually refer to them as like German nomadic tribes.
Mhm.
Interesting, people without a home. Who does that remind you of? So, this idea of being German was very fragmented up until 1870-ish,
Mhm.
or when things really began to I don't know, be established for German nationalism, where they're making things. They've got pride in the things that they're producing. I'm imagining like the cars, the automobiles at that time, or whatever was that Germany was starting to be, or the art, Wagner. Hell, we were talking about how still to this day, the Wedding March was written by Wagner, and he was such a big influence on Hitler, which we'll get into in a moment. But yeah, I mean, it's so embedded in our culture now. We don't even see the contributions of these philosophers that we've been talking about. German, 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 and so that brings a lot of pride to this idea of being German now. It's like, okay, we came from nomadic tribes and then we built this. Yeah. Yeah. It becomes a political entity with power.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's that imperial self-promotion.
Because it was in the time when England and France and the Netherlands were just going places and say, okay, this is now my land. Never mind the fact that there's actually people living there. So, and Germany was behind. They haven't sent that many people to claim lands for themselves. Like, big part of Africa, either belongs to the French, or the Dutch had a part which they gave away to the English, and a lot of parts of the world they, colonized and made their imperium like huge because they just took other people's land. So
yeah,
and then Germany was behind in that, so they feel like they had to fight for their right to, be part of this game of
yeah,
conquering the world.
right. Like a national identity was needed for
Mm.
these people that were like living through this kind of secularization, for there to be some sort of anagogic element to it. It's like, okay, well, we're striving towards German, and Germany and pride in our country. And meanwhile, like, this is before American pride really set in, because American pride came from this response to World War II. So that's something to keep in mind too. There wasn't a little baby country to claim superpower,
Mm.
and it just so happened that America had the nice water barrier
Yeah,
to keep
because it was about land. It was a lot about land in Europe itself, and
land
political power.
acquisition. Yeah,
Yeah, which
yeah,
of course America is quite far away. So I mean,
yeah,
they had their own land struggles, the freedom
right.
fights and stuff like that. So
Yep.
um,
Yeah,
so
there's something in that though about like the baby, the new one that's like, I'm gonna make myself known, and I think that that's part of this that needs to be brought forth and recognized, as there is a sense of like real drive here. There's a real will power
mm,
trying to make itself seen and known.
mm. Yeah, there was a lot of will to power going on in that time in the world. That's actually even before, because we're now at the brink of the First World War only, but even there was this will to power, progress, where going towards utopia, where we're just moving ahead and everything's going to be great. And then the First World War happened, which was like very much a shock to a lot of people, a rude awakening. Like, this progress thing is not working. For some reason, we fell back into it. But,
Yeah. So yeah, it comes to a crashing disaster in World War II, and he says drenches Europe in blood and destruction, especially Germany, which is defeated.
World War One, I
Okay,
think so.
I meant
I
one.
think so.
Okay.
Germany first had to be defeated in the First World War, and then they were completely humiliated.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah,
So there was like that build in the sense of pride, and it like reaches this peak point, and then it's not even just a flat line, it's a crash.
Yeah.
Like, no, you're shit. Like,
Yeah.
no, and actually you have to pay back all that money, and we're
Yeah.
gonna inflict big tariffs or whatever, all the things.
Yeah.
You're in debt. You're a piece of shit. Go back home.
You're not
Yeah.
allowed to have a military, or there were
Right.
so
No
many
building.
rules.
Yeah.
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 You
It was.
not only do you not have the opportunity to be a thriving country, but also you're being punished. And yeah, there's no there you don't get the ability to build out of this and build the new identity that you once had.
Mhm. So very bad parenting.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Punishment is not going to be
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
effective as you want it to be for your purposes anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a really good analogy to keep bringing up too, is that if we look at these collective instances of insanity in a compassionate, empathetic way, it's going to make this whole healing process a lot easier than if we're damning and punishing all people in history for all the fucking atrocities that have been inflicted on human race. Might as well just go sit yourself in a corner, because somewhere in your bloodline you've been a part of it too.
Yeah. For sure. For
You're a
sure.
survivor. There's no other way
Yeah.
to survive in those times than to kill.
Yeah.
Everybody's people did it.
Yeah.
Everybody's people inflicted atrocities on one another. You just look deep enough into the history and you'll see it. So that, hey, we can all take that stance of, I've been infringed upon. My people have been, pushed down. Everybody can take that perspective, but who can take the perspective of having empathy and compassion for the collective that brought in those weird ideologies, those strange beliefs about themselves, that they were a victim. Like, okay, let's hold space for that. And and that's why I'm kind of looking at Germany as like the little kid that's like, look at my picture, it needs the validation, it needs to be seen. And every nation has experienced that. Any nation that wants to establish itself is saying, I am a sovereign entity. I need to be seen and acknowledged as that, or else it doesn't seem real. It doesn't seem like I'm being respected in this way. And yeah, there's a way that we can be compassionate towards that, or there's a way that we can be aggressive.
And aggression is probably not going to get us anywhere. So
yeah, let's talk more on that. Finding the enemy. The Germany was tainted by anti-Semitism. He mentions some faith practices that might have participated in that anti-Semitism. People that participated in that anti-Semitism. I read a book that I've continued to mention throughout this whole series, The Nazis and the Occult, which I won't show an image of because there's swastikas all over it. It's not good to take out in public to read, but it really does highlight how this can happen. Because they're talking about the occult, so how bringing magic into this, the mythology that was brought into this, the bringing in the astrology is as above so below, like when you bring in those hermetic principles to what your viewpoint is, what your identity is, you can really take yourself down a magical rabbit hole. But you can also spin out into insanity, where you're like actually participating in this way where you feel like you've got this divine role. You're the one, everybody's got a natal chart. The aspects line up all different for everybody. So even twins, moments apart, the ascendant's going to be in a different place. It's going to move things. So yes, you're special, but in this way where you're a part of the one. And that's what I like about astrology, but that can also be used by someone where they can see a transit, which was what Hitler was doing by accounts from this book. You can use the astrology to choose a day to do something. It's called electional astrology. You can utilize it in a way where it can, depending on your motives and your intentions, be dark magic. That was some of the things that I was like really hearing, was not only like the mythology of also like Excalibur's sword. It's not actually Excalibur's sword, but it's like a dagger or some sort of spear. The spear that Jesus the spear that they threw at Jesus. And this is something that Hitler witnessed or saw at a museum by accounts of this book. Mind you, that's what they keep saying, is like, this was like a mythology that was created about this guy. There was this huge mythology around him. He used to go to the books and read all the library books and Like there's this aura that they're designing. So maybe there's something about the charisma of this guy. Like he might not have been actually that intelligent, but he just had a lot of charisma. And so there's so many elements to this where Hitler instilled himself into a living mythology that already existed as the next Messiah, as the next one that's like in line to do it. And people are like, how am I supposed to argue? This whole book's been written about him. So the way that history is shaped has a lot to do with the writers, obviously. And that's what you see really in this book is that he was going for in real life. The whole like world is part of this theatrical play, like we're talking about with World War One and the Clash. We're going to get into the actual combat that happened, but nothing like that had ever happened before. And when you see this stuff on a movie or something, you're in it and it feels epic. So that's something to present is these people were brainwashed because it felt like they were in a living movie. Who doesn't want to experience that? I mean, as horrific and graphic as that is, yeah.
There's so many things coming to mind when you speak, but also nothing. So because I also feel a sense of aporia when you speak like that, because it's like there's huge red flags, right? Because everything that you just said about Hitler, who doesn't want to, like you said, feel like they're part of something special, like they're part of, you know,
The unfolding of history.
destiny. Yes,
Yeah.
the unfolding of history. Well said. Exactly. And he was,
Made himself.
but
He inserted himself into it. Yeah.
how do you want history to unfold? Do you really want to be part of the unfolding of history that badly
Right.
that that's what you will
That you're a main
create?
character. Yeah. Whether villain or not. He even saw himself
Yeah.
in this book. They say he saw himself as the Antichrist.
Oh.
He was like, and of course, part of the mythology, but yeah, like initiated into that. And I don't remember exactly because there's a whole little section in a chapter about it, but yeah, he's satanic because they're anti-Catholic. They're very against the Catholic faith. This just like a lot of practitioners of magic, like they mentioned Theodore Roos, a practitioner of tantric sex magic, and Sar Peladin, the French writer on the occult. Also, Wagner was an intuitive magician, according to these people. There's just like a lot of elements of building the mythology. Ravenscroft is the guy that continues to write about Hitler. So there's just like this whole epic, thing to it. And of course, it would be very easy if people start coming up to you, even in the movie Dune, which is a great way to like reflect on this clash. Because I was saying it's almost like the two combating groups in that movie kind of represent this clash too.
But we're
Yeah,
jumping a
I
little
know.
bit
So
ahead.
that's why I was like, let me stop. So
Yeah, it's because throw this mythological, charismatic person into a Germany that's completely that's a vacuum. They're philosophically destroyed. They have these elements of anti-Semitism from Luther, Rhineland mystics, Gnosticism. There's a lot of fragmentation because of the Reformation. There's this will to power. My history professor said that the SS would have two books on their bed shelves: the New Testament, because of course the Old Testament, that's the people of the Jews, and the will to power, or Nietzsche's Zarathustra. Nietzsche's Zarathustra will have they would have those two books on their book. That was like their holy scripture.
you know what?
So,
It reminds me, because of where John is, Toronto, that there was a recent article by the Free Press that says that public schools in Toronto, and I don't know, I haven't confirmed if this is true or not, have removed all books that were published prior to 2000 8, I think. All those books gone. Nope, not even gonna look into it. And they even said the Diary of Anne Frank. Nope, get it out. None of that. You can't even question. So from 2009 on is when history started. The year I graduated, baby.
So you know all of history.
I know
Because
all of
all of
history.
history.
I've lived as my adulthood started. I began history. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. The millennial generation is taking us to the next frontier. They trust us that much. Cute little Gen Zers, whatever they're called. They trust us so much that they will give their destiny to authors only from my graduation year and beyond. Yes. So anyway, that was coming up because, yeah, eliminating the Old Testament and saying none of that's relevant. We just need to look at this part.
That also takes this book out of the equation.
Yeah,
when he
Moby
talks.
Dick. Bye.
Bye bye.
Moby.
Okay, then we won't talk about you.
All of those books behind you, I bet. Probably nearly 75%, if not more, of those books behind you.
Well, this is mostly actually relatively new.
Okay.
Because it's all I think probably my fiction shelf is forbidden more than my non-fiction shelf.
Yeah, true. That makes sense.
Yeah. No, she doesn't make it 2006. Sorry.
Well, sorry, you're out of here. Gotta go. Not allowed in Toronto public schools. Okay, I digress.
And then he talks of Hitler and the autodidactic vortex of Hitler's mind. It's also really beautiful.
I have a fragmented autodidactic approach to meaning making. Yeah.
Which is, John keeps saying how dangerous autodidacticism is. But later we will come back to the fact that that's, for many people, that's one of the only options. And which is what I love about us. It feels like the five of us are, all of us, deeply steeped in a tradition, which we then learn from each other. So it's not really autodidactic because we learn from someone who really knows, type of thing. I don't know. Maybe I'm just bullshitting myself. Maybe we're just bullshitting ourselves.
I think we're going to end every sentence with that. Maybe I'm just bullshitting myself. How will we ever know? Good thing we're getting into Coxsci next episode.
Yeah. We'll see. We'll see.
So there's this book, Mein Kampf, where Hitler sees himself and his struggle as symbolic of all of Germany. He sees himself as the representative of Germany. My struggles are your struggles. I know what it's like because these are all the things. And there's like fabrications of his story about his growing up too. Like they try to make him seem like this oppressed, sad, kid that was just, he didn't get into the art schools he wanted to be into. He didn't get into the architecture school he wanted to be into. He was just wearing clothes and he had to watercolor paint for his, to make money. And it's like, it wasn't really that fucking bad. It wasn't really that much of a struggle, but he saw himself in this state of victimhood because of the state of his nation. His nationality was infringed upon by like Habsburg or something like that. And even like they just like annihilated this whole idea of German culture. So yeah.
Wow. What just red flag for me again is the danger of seeing yourself in the state of victimhood.
But we were talking earlier how there's a place to be held in that if the feminine is operating as it is, I think, most effective, which is providing unconditional love for these kinds of trip out moments. Like, not saying that anybody should have loved the things that Hitler was saying, obviously. But, there was a person kind of in a mental breakdown prior to entering, like he was going real weird places with occult traditions and things like that, and really spinning out into this character that people were supporting and validating. And so of course he just goes through that. I'm being validated for this position. People see me as this because I say that I am this. So there's something that a community can provide that's that bullshit check of, I mean, I had people abandon me in my process of spinning out. I don't blame them because I was living a mythology in my mind and trying to act that out. And they were like, I'm not accepting that. Um, and then there was other people that held me unconditionally because they were in a position to be able to do that. Because those people that rejected me were seeing something in me that they knew of themselves. Whereas the people that were able to hold me unconditionally were seeing a child that wanted attention. And they were like, I'm going to give you love and I'm going to tell you that I'm here to support you. Some of the things that you're doing are a little wild, but I'm still here for you. So yeah, I just like another like reflection on empathizing with how this mindset can take hold, empathizing, you know, with just the idea that we can spin ourselves into even more chaos if nobody's there to hold space for the initial receiving of that download.
The importance of community, and I feel particularly the context that John so sketches so well here. I feel particularly strong emphasis, mostly actually for the German people of Hitler's time, more than
Yes,
him himself, because
absolutely.
they were like, they needed a savior, and there he was.
Yep. Gladly ready to take that. Yeah. And that's the difference. That's the difference. When people put you on a pedestal and you're happy, because you hear John saying all the time, and I'm not saying John's, you know, a messiah in this way, but every time he's like trying to credit the people that he's getting information from, he's trying to say, like, don't worship me, like, no, you know, he's like really humble. And that's the big difference. It's hubris versus humility.
I think it's beyond humility even. I think it's one of his biggest fears that people will put him on a pedestal. Because there is temptation, of course, and to go sit on that pedestal.
Yeah.
And he knows how bullshitting that can be. Yeah. And that will take you places that you really do not want to go. And the fall from a pedestal can be very painful, I assume.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of Gandalf having Frodo take the ring. Like, because he's like, I have too much power to take that. And it's not that you're powerless, but maybe not so aware of your power as I am.
Yeah.
And so, no, please.
And it's a different kind of power.
Yeah.
Frodo's power is very different from Gandalf's
Yeah.
power.
Yeah.
Gandalf can freaking destroy the world with his power. Frodo can just be really strong. A brave little hobbit.
Yeah.
But he's nothing without Sam. He's nothing without Sam.
Lest we not mention Sam. Okay. So the struggle, like Mein Kampf, Hitler sees himself as Germany. That's a Gnostic nightmare because there's a trapped master race. And okay, so this is where he's really emphasizing on what we've been trying to bring forth, I think, a little bit with this idea of Nazism being just a political movement. It's not. It's pseudo-religious. They have made this guy into a messiah, and he's gladly accepting that role. There's a pseudo-religious totalitarianism where they think this is fate, this is destiny unfolding, and they're part of that unfolding of history.
In a way, it's true, though. They were part of the unfolding of history. But like I said earlier, it's. I mean, you mentioned it before we recorded that thing that we have, that we always say, choose your loves. Man, that is important.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I know charisma. I know how attractive it is. I know that even if it's inflicting pain on you sometimes, it can still be attracting. So addictive. Yep. Come back to it. And yeah. Also, if it can identify an enemy for you, someone else to cast the blame on, that's potent. There's a love for me as the perpetrator of this magic, we'll say, this allure. There's something about me that you like, yeah, I don't like those. I don't like that, this, that. And so further defining like this is what we're on. All of that is separate. And this is the way, this is the one, this is the whole one, this right here, just this little alley. That's everything. And there's something
only books after 2008.
Yeah.
That's the way.
Tunnel vision, people. Let's put on our blinders. Nothing to see here. Yeah. And it's easy to be like, oh, that's one path. Oh, that gets me there. Let's go. And yeah, getting really, and especially if it's starting to reward you. Now I have an identity. Now I know who I am. You're telling me, yes, we've done that. We're the reason, you know. I know.
And the beginning of, Second World War, the whole build-up, the Nazi build-up, they were extremely successful. There was reward for their following this Messiah.
Yeah.
It's this fake Messiah.
Yeah.
Just clarify.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So that brutal response intensified by the socioeconomic collapse of the Great Depression. So they're feeling all these feelings about their identity and all this stuff, and then it crashes. Then the Great Depression happens. And there's this, I don't know, he brings up the fact that Nazism was about race and communism was about class, which brings us into the Eastern Front.
So you kind of went back a little bit. Why did the Second World War happen? There was this, or why did Hitler happen, actually? There was this void in Germany. Then there was the economic clash. So people were starving for food, but also for recognition, like you said. That little child, look at my picture, and then Hitler took stage, literally, and they saw, and he presented them with like an ideology that gave them a feeling of, yes, I matter. Yes, my life has purpose. I'm part of something beautiful and big and important. Yeah. And then World War II happened. And then within World War II, there was this, because John mentioned, we usually look at it from a like Western Front perspective, like what happened in France, what happened in England, here in the Netherlands, what happened here in the Netherlands. That's where our attention is, because that's what we lived through. What happened in America, which is kind of like a yay story for America. You were the heroes of the day.
We got to save the day. Yeah.
But like I mentioned, and I don't know if it's safe to mention it, also recorded, but the actual heroes were the Russians, because they broke Hitler when he was at his strongest. And he couldn't, because in the beginning he was like like a tsunami. He was a tsunami, this bullshit tsunami. He was also a tsunami that just I think it was 4 days, and then the Netherlands surrendered. After 4 days, a whole country just surrendered to the Germans. And so he just took everything like a huge tsunami until he reached a certain place in Russia. This Kursk, I don't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah. So that's, and then also mentioning too, because that's what kind of like what that is describing, like the kairos towards the promised land. So this turning point in history towards the promised land. I think that's I think that's what Hitler was promising to people. He's part of the kairos. He's part of this humongous, like he's like, it's never been seen before in history. And Hitler's describing himself as Germany, the turning point in history.
Yeah. So you're not saying the kairos was that moment of the conflict. You're saying Hitler. Okay. Yes, and that's very true. He was like, we're this great nation, and we're gonna secure territory for this great nation.
But just him seeing himself as that, and that's part of the idea of messianic.
Yeah. True.
Okay. So like you were saying, like we often mention the British, French, American, Canadian perspective on the war, but from this perspective of Kursk in 1943, which is well into the, or is that like leading us into the second?
It's close to the end.
Yeah, because
1945, I think,
is when it ended.
is our yeah.
So with this particular war, now keeping in mind this is the World War, and I think people refer to it as the Great War, and it's like nothing like this has ever been seen, and he's really emphasizing that here with millions of men, tens of thousands of tanks and planes, and just terrible brutality. And that was why I was mentioning Dune earlier, because if you wanted like an optics of what this could potentially, I mean, there's plenty of movies I'm sure that you could see this, but it was just really relevant for me because I mean, all the elements are there. The messianic kid that's there with his mother, and there's prophecies about him, and this clash between two great forces. But the one that comes in, outer world, because I mean, you have the one where it's about class in the desert. There's a class system established. The desert people are poor. They don't have very much, but they're also survivors, and they're pretty ruthless. Then you have
That sounds very much like my idea of Russian peasants. But that might be wrong, my idea, but that sounds a lot like it.
no, I think you might be actually, yeah, because that's the class and this whole idea of
Yeah.
Marx.
Yeah.
And so that's the desert people in this analogy. And then you have the outer worldly people who are bald. I mean, it's very clear to me. And they have this one guy, he's this big fat monster that's like sitting in a, like most of the time he's sitting in a bath or something. Every now and then he can like lift himself up out of it and fly or do crazy things like that. But he's just like an awful dictator. And they come in, and the kind of power, so this would be actually reminiscent of what Russia did, like what you're saying, like coming in hot to quell it. So the roles kind of get mixed up in that sense, but just like imagining this just superpower coming in with these flames at this city that's, it's got barriers and walls, but those have all been completely annihilated. The emperor is even killed. I mean, it's crazy. And the thing is, like, all the ships are getting blown up and all this stuff, and the people that are running out to the ships to go man them, they're just like out in the middle of nothing, and their response is run to the enemy and try to kill as many of those assholes as you can. So there's like some ruthless, brutal mindset that has to be, because I was telling you, like, I wouldn't have. My perspective on that as the egg carrier is preserve the species and run. I don't know if every particular egg carrier woman would feel that way, but that's just like from my perspective. I'm like, yeah, I think there's something biological in that. That's like run the fuck away as far as you can and don't get captured.
Yeah. Well, there you just added solution also to the question, what is a woman? From now on, we don't refer to woman, we just refer to egg carriers.
Egg carrier. That's what they want to do, though. So that's why
Oh.
I'm specifically anti that in a woman. Woman.
Oh, I don't even know that. I'm so not clued
it's
up on.
something along the lines of baby producer or something like that. I don't remember what it is, but it's no longer woman. It's whatever. I won't accept it. So woman.
No.
But
I
yeah,
am
okay.
woman,
So
hear me roar.
I am woman, hear me roar. Helen, ready? I just wanted to like really emphasize, because he was getting into it about how big and epic it was.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Like,
and it sounds like you experienced something epic then, like, well, in this period, the same period.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's beyond comprehension, he says.
Mm. Brutal is the word I wrote down.
Yeah, brutal.
I'm curious. I don't see why the fact that they're bald is so symbolically rich.
Well, it just because now like the whole idea of neo-Nazism is associated with skinhead in this
yes,
context of American
yeah,
perspective.
that's true. I didn't even see that. Yeah. Well
So
spotted.
not to put that label on it, I'm not giving power to that organization, with that, but it was really reflective, even
Yeah.
though it is such that, this was like a flipped analogy and terrifying also too,
Yeah.
of that entity being the
Yeah.
one that actually was the superpower that overcame
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
annihilated the kind of communal.
Yeah.
And not even to relate the desert people in that instance to the Marxist idealism,
Yeah.
but there is something to it where they're like looking for a savior. They see themselves as subordinate to that, which can, I don't know, establish a promised land.
Mm.
Yeah, I will be in service to this because it is for the greater good.
Mm.
That's clear in their perspective too. So
Mm.
yeah.
Wow, our machinery is really, really interesting. Let me use the word interesting, because I feel
Interesting.
like that must be part of our machinery, right? The same machinery that,
Makes us
that thing.
adaptable, makes us
Yeah,
susceptible to bullshit.
that instinct to work towards the greater good, because that is what the people believed they were doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why he's like, there's so much to this. Everything that he has to touch in this series has to be so shallow. And it's so deep, but it's
Yeah,
still so shallow compared to
yeah,
where he could go on all
yeah,
the different tangents of thought, all the different cognitive ways that
yeah,
people can get to that perspective, but you
yeah,
kind of just have to flatline it somewhere too and just say,
yeah,
this is the dynamic and that's
yeah.
relevant to you because of this.
Mm. I think he told Robert he has like 20,000 lectures that he could give if he had the time or something like that.
I hope he makes
And
the time. Okay, well, I'm serious. There's a fixation at a level of beliefs. So the perspectival sort of knowing, because this is relevant to what you were just saying, the perspectival form of knowing now becomes your political viewpoint. It's flat.
Mm,
It is now
mm,
just this. Because we could, if anybody watches, they'd be like, Nazi sympathizers. There's a really easy label you can put on anything, right wing adjacent or, whatever. So you can reduce it down to my political viewpoint. She's talking about this, so she must think this.
mm,
There's also the reducing of the participatory knowing into your political identification. So how I see myself, that's how I participate in it.
mm,
So I see myself as a Democrat. So I have to register as Democrat and I'm going to vote Democrat. And anytime I'm in conversation with anybody, it's Democratic values that are coming out of my mouth.
mm. Two things come to my mind: love the sun and not the sin. And uh, in Star Wars, it is said, only the Sith thinks in black and white.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, that's what this whole thing is about too, is that was kind of the Nazi perspective, was that there was a dark and there was a light.
Mm,
There's
mhm.
that battle, and it's not just exclusive to that entity, but yeah, that whole idea of dark and light.
That's often in this pseudo-religious ideologies. That is often the case. There's right and wrong, good and
We're the
evil.
carriers of light. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We know the way, and you're not on it.
Yeah. And when it's the secularized political process of pseudo-religious ideologies, not just a result, but also causally feedbacks into the meaning crisis. So there's that
Mm,
meaning crisis is just fueled by, now what does the secularized political process look like? It contains oftentimes, or it might, these pseudo-religious ideologies of,
yeah,
if we don't have a God, then what is it that we serve? Our
mm,
political system, our nation.
mm,
And that's, yeah, causally feeding back into the meaning crisis. Because without that, what is my meaning?
yeah. So where are you now? Are you now at the meta crisis?
The meta crisis. Yes. And all of its constituent parts.
Yes. To address this, have to have a comprehensive change in our consciousness, cognition, character, and culture. how do we get these? In the past, it was only done by religion. And then there's the free things that we're not trying, or that happened in the absence of religion, the gap that religion, the hole that religion left.
Yeah, trying to fill that.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, in that instance, we were traumatized by pseudo-religious ideologies, because you can
Which
see
is
where that
one of
goes.
the ones that we just discussed. Yeah.
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 But then
It's not pretty.
no, exactly. So there's real trauma attached to that. And so it's like, okay, so that's not it then. But I mean, you throw out the baby with the bathwater when you do that.
Mm.
So then this whole either return to religious fundamentalism, that nostalgic attempt to return to religion, which falls into fundamentalism. And then when it's interacting with politics, it can be used for terrorism.
Mm.
You can use your religion to inflict pain on another country.
Mm. Or you can just be an asshole, because he specifically also states that, like, there's also, we will also, some atheists classify them as fundamental,
Right.
fundamentalist religions, and best case scenario, you're just an asshole, like judgmental and not open to anything except your own view.
Yeah. Yeah, and that can dangerously interact with terrorism too.
Yeah, that's worst case scenario.
So yeah, post-religious leads you to nihilism. It can. We won't say it does. It's a option. That's one way to veer off of a good post-religious path, is to enter into nihilism or cynicism, or going too far into those rabbit holes.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's saying dangerously interacting because of social media and the internet. This desire to be seen, to be heard, is really amplified when you got a big ass megaphone that goes across the globe. And especially if there's no consequences for your actions, there's no repercussions, you can say whatever the fuck you want. And if somebody has something to say about it, they got to go to really extreme measures in order to actually inflict pain upon you.
Yeah. And this also sparks the memory of, like, people desperately want to be part of something bigger, which is one of the things that gives meaning to your life. Like, feeling that you are part of something bigger than yourself. So it's this desperate longing for meaning that sets people on all these paths. That's so dangerous.
Yeah. Especially what I find interesting to kind of make the distinction is there's this idea of it being global. My impact is global. Or there's this, because there's that whole quote of think global but act local. Keeping it into the small community, recognizing your role in the small community. Maybe that expands out into the wider world. You never know. But showing up and recognizing your place in a small group, and you get to pick. There's lots of different options for you to pick which one. But the small groups and finding your identity in that, as opposed to like a global perspective.
And that is important. And maybe it's absolutely not relevant for this episode, but maybe it is. That brings us back to the dialectic, because that's what dialectic for Plato is this conversation, being a way to anagoge. Because in the search, even if you don't find the answer, you grow and you move beyond yourself. I will actually end with a quote again from Plato that refers slightly. So it's not just about trying to say the right things. It's about realizing you are growing through the search together, the search that we're going through together. There's growth.
Yep.
And self-transcendence.
Yeah.
And moving beyond yourself, and that's why you need the other to move beyond yourself, because you can't move beyond yourself by yourself.
Yeah. And the Geist doesn't develop if we're not all contributing to its development.
Yeah.
So that's something, is like seeing it as a personal victory is great, in some instances, but recognizing that we're all contributing to the development of the Geist in whatever way we show up, even if it's being wrong, that's helpful. It's helpful to see how we can be wrong.
Actually, your exact words, I want to say, no, that's not unfortunately true. You said that the Geist doesn't develop if we don't all show up. But that's exactly not right. The guise does develop if you don't show up, but it develops in a way that you might not want it to develop.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, the meta crisis. Did we summarize it well? There's a lot, obviously, with the meta crisis. There's contributing factors include the meaning crisis intertwining with ecological, socioeconomic, spiritual, and existential, the mental health crisis. All these crises that we know and love so much because we just make news porn off of them.
Yeah.
We are very familiar with what the crises are.
Yeah.
We're just not stepping up and taking action, which is scary to say because that leads to revolution or whatever. And it's like, yeah.
Well, like I said before we started, I think it was before we started recording, that it feels like the meaning crisis is kind of like the spirit of it, you know, the atmosphere that pervades it.
Yeah.
And I do think we're taking steps that's relatively safe towards like making that a little less, at least in our own lives, because we do find profound meaning in what we are doing. And, you know, so we are, if this is how I get to contribute, I will be happy, you know?
Me too. Yeah.
And yeah, so yeah, I don't know. My words, what did you say? My words, my mouth and my mind is numb at the moment. So.
Yeah. Oh wow, is there a stingray nearby? Oh well, I think what I hear is if my contribution is this, then so be it.
Yeah.
This was what I was called to do.
Yeah.
And this feels ethically, morally right and sophisticated.
Yes.
Okay, because he says we have to have a comprehensive change in cognition, consciousness, character, and culture. And we added, and maybe he said it too, that this happens within communities. This has been traditionally taken on, this meaning crisis has been traditionally solved with religion. Since we don't have that so much anymore, in trying to create those alternatives. Oh, whoops. Okay, we already went through the 3.
Yeah. But it's a good recap because the next thing he says is it's not a political problem.
Yeah.
Which is exactly the reason why it's not a political problem. Because it's not because we lost politics, it's because we lost religion that we have this problem. So it's a good way to emphasize like this is definitely not it's that deep longing to belong to something, to be devoted to something bigger than yourself and to be part of the whole and to serve and to, you know, that
sacrifice. Yeah.
To sacrifice. That is we don't have a place, a good place to bring that. And that is why we need a religion that is not a religion or a God beyond all gods. Which, like we said before recording, that in itself is tricky. Because what distinguishes the religion that is not a religion from a pseudo-religious ideology?
Yes, we would like that question answered. That is the perplexing one. Yeah, he says we can't deal with the meaning crisis by pursuing pseudo-religious ideologies, trying to deal with it as a political issue. And that's not effective either. He says the meaning crisis is not a struggle between political ideologies. There is no political solution for our troubled evolution, to quote the police. We need a religion that is not a religion, a God beyond all gods. So the clash of pseudo-religious ideologies is not only symptomatic of the meaning crisis, it contributes to the meaning crisis by locking us into this aspect of the meaning crisis in which we need a God of all gods. We need a religion that is not a religion. So we're just like hooked into this crisis of meaning because it's like, what is that we're going to attach ourselves to, that we're going to devote ourselves to, that isn't going to be pseudo-religious?
And I do want to point out how dangerous the situation is, because this is exactly what we said to the German people, the situation the German people were in when they found a Messiah in the shape of Hitler. It's a very very dangerous place to be in. This need, this longing, this lack.
Yeah.
It's yeah. We are very much, but at least now we're aware of the fact that we should be
Thanks to
careful.
Hegel.
Yeah.
Well, it brings back up that idea of domicide, you know. The domicide is still so embedded
Mm,
and unconsciously embedded, you know, whether or not we realize how much that domicide killed our meaning
mm,
and how it's so evident in the fact that of that time, the German nation had no home. And then once it
mm,
established a home, then it takes great pride in that home.
mm, mm.
And then that can lead to the pseudo-religious ideologies of we came from the bottom, now we're at the top. What are we
Yep.
going to do with being at the top?
Mm,
Yikes.
mm,
That's kind of scary. So we've had this long historical analysis through 25 episodes. And I said this is kind of like the genealogy, or you said the memeology, which I like. The memeology of this meaning crisis. And now we're going to turn it now to the cognitive scientific analysis of the machinery of meaning making. Like now, okay, wow, we got all of this history to see all the
mm.
different perspectives from, but now actually we have this ability to look back on not just stories, not just myths like in the Judeo example where now we're able to, you know, correct problems and things like that in our stories, but now we can go back and look at the machine from the perspective of the machinery of cognition,
Mm,
mind,
mm.
use that to extrapolate the junk but the good stuff,
Yeah,
and you
yeah,
know, discern
yeah.
what's usable in all of that.
And personally, I feel like this is very, because I'm so worried, because everything that we say, I'm like, oh, but that's also playing in my life. Oh, but that's also playing in my life. Like, I'm really, really happy that we now get to look at what's going on in my mind, you know, when these things are popping up. And I hope, I imagine John's going to tell us how we can tell bullshit from truth, or from the real, and from, yeah, the the
Yeah,
beautiful
yeah,
from the
veneer.
trash.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 So one of the main things that he mentions here is we science has fragmented the mind. There's so many different disciplines that study the mind. He includes neuroscience, psychology, linguistics, anthropology, computer science, and even artificial general intelligence is really trying to understand the mind, but they're all coming from it at different places. Like, let's understand the brain, let's understand information processing, let's understand human behavior, language, culture. So the networking of the minds, and yeah, just distributed cognition, as he puts it. So there, this mind, which is, he calls it the organ of cognition, is divided up so much, and then he uses this word equivocation.
Yeah. So what John is explaining here is his view of what cognitive science is. And I think I heard it from him, so it's probably in the next episode. He says some people say cognitive sciences, but he sees it as one. And it's so Neoplatonic. Of course, this will be his
The
view, because
one.
it's this levels of reality
Mm-hmm.
that, and he wants to indeed incorporate all these levels of reality that they incorporate in a holistic way, but not just through easy equation. What is the word that you used? I wrote it something.
Equivocation.
Not just easy equivocation. They don't just this one is this, but they all influence each other. Like the levels of reality in Neoplatonism, they all influence.
Mm.
They merge and emanate from each other, and there's like everything is connected type of thing. Everything is part of this whole. And he wants us to also be able to see the mind through cognitive science eye as a whole. So look at all these different disciplines. The brain, neuroscience working with the brain, computer science working with information processing, psychology working with behavior, linguistics working with language, anthropology working with culture. Culture, of course, I think the queen of all disciplines is actually theology, but I believe in John's mind, the queen of all disciplines are philosophy. So how do we make this all work together? By getting training in philosophy, and then looking at it from a philosophical, through the lens of philosophy with that philosophical training. And that is what cognitive science is to him, like this philosophical approach to the different, integrating all the different disciplines of the mind so that we can integrate our understanding of the mind, so that we can integrate our understanding of ourselves. Because the anagoge that we're striving towards is that oneness, becoming one ourselves, wanting. Robert always uses the term wanting. We are wanting. As the one is wanting, we are wanting. And so, yeah, it's a very Neoplatonic perspective, I would say.
Yeah, and I think the first thing that came to my mind, in brackets I wrote, mind needs to see that it's fragmenting. So we actually have to just, like, this was what cognitive science is kind of like seeming like for me, just from the beginner stage, is this is an opportunity for the mind to notice that it's fragmented, to bring that back all into oneness, wholeness. And it takes the recognition, the realization before you can even begin the journey.
That will be the philosophical part, or the philosophy part.
Yeah.
That we are now
Then that's why
seeing.
I'm like seeing a summary then of
Yeah.
1 through 25. Like, what we've just learned is that there's this ability for the mind to be able to reflect on itself.
Yes. And also its history. And we
And its
have been
history.
reflecting on the history of the mind through
Yeah.
all the series up to here.
So then what I saw with cognitive science, because I told you it was almost like a classroom and then the lab portion. Like the lab portions when you actually get in and start playing with stuff and manipulating things, objects, working with the formulas to really understand what they actually can manifest as.
Yeah.
It's the experimental part.
So you think we're moving into the experimental part? Is that
The
what you're saying?
experiment has begun. No, it began a long time ago, but now we'll have some sort of realization about what's going on, because we keep saying, like, this is impacting my life, actually. Like, my actual outside of this world life is being impacted by my studying this. So now I'm actually going to be able to
It's because we're
see.
practicing awakening from the meaning crisis. That's why it's
Yeah.
actually impacting our lives.
We've been actually already incorporating the lab portion of this by this experiment of talking, and without realizing that that's what we were doing. So now we're going to have eyes on what we're doing here.
Yeah. To see how we are bullshitting ourselves and how we can best avoid that.
Yes. So do you have anything else before we wrap this one up?
I do have from the same Meno a little later on. So Socrates goes on to illustrate how there is no such thing as teaching. You can just help people remember, recollect. And then at a certain point, he comes back to this idea that he's a stingray. And this is what Socrates is. It hints at that which is Socrates is most famous for. Socrates says, "Observe, Meno, the stage he has reached on the path of recollection." And I do think it's beautiful, because I feel I've felt this today. At the beginning, he did not know the truth, the side of the square of 8 feet. So he was supposed to answer that, the little slave boy. Nor indeed does he know it now. So he doesn't know the answer, nor does he know it now. But then he thought he knew it, and he answered boldly, as was appropriate. He felt no perplexity. Now, however, he does feel perplexed. Not only does he not know the answer, he doesn't even think he knows. Quite true, Meno says, Socrates. Isn't he in a better position now in relation to what he didn't know? Meno, I admit that too. Socrates. So in perplexing him and numbing him like the stingray, have I done him any harm? I think not, Meno says. In fact, Socrates says, we have helped him to some extent toward finding out the right answer. For now, not only is he ignorant of it, but he will be quite glad to look for it. Up to now, he thought he could speak well and fluently, on many occasions and before large audiences, on the subject of a square double the size of a given square, maintaining that it must have the side of a double length, no doubt, Meno says. Do you suppose then that he would be tempted to look for or learn what he thought he knew, though he did not, before he was thrown into perplexity, became aware of his ignorance and felt a desire to know? No. Then the numbing process was good for him. I agree.
I do not have the answers. I can show you the way.
Yes. We've said this before, that we are so committed, so devoted to what we're doing here, that, and this is dangerous, but
yeah,
at a certain level, we don't even care if we're bullshitting ourselves anymore. We have to see this through.
Yeah.
We have to see this through. And pray for the best. And thank God for Socrates.